the 17th Annual Newburyport Literary Festival. Now, I will invite to join me on screen Kiran Kapoor, whom I hope you had the chance to hear read in the previous hour. I've asked Kiran to introduce our first reader because Kiran has a serendipitous connection with Taylor Byas, whom we're very excited to have with us today.
Thank you, Alfred. It is my great pleasure to introduce Taylor Byas. Taylor is a Black Chicago native, currently living in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I'm very happy to report she has just completed her exams and is now gloriously ABD, all but dissertation, in her PhD program. In 2020, she was the first place winner of both the Poetry Superhighway and the Frontier Poetry Award for New Poets, and was a finalist for Frontier's Open Prize. She's the author of the chapbook Blood Warm, and her debut full-length, I Done Clicked My Heels 3 Times, is forthcoming from Soft Skull Press in spring 2023. I first encountered Taylor's work as an editor. She'd sent some poems to the Adrienne Rich Award for Poetry, a contest run by the Beloit Poetry Journal, the journal where I work. And I was, along with my fellow editors, in the process of reading and sorting and meditating upon well over 1,000 poems that had come to us through the contest. But then, suddenly, there were Taylor's lines. It's one of the great pleasures of editorial work, as some of you will know, when a poem steps forward, steps right off the page. And despite having read so many other poems, even very fine ones, a single poem won't let you forget it. And I was not the only person to think so. Natasha Trethway, who was our final judge that year, selected it too, from a pool of very talented finalists. Natasha wrote, "Tell It Like a Movie, Rewind" is a stunning poem that unfolds like a near palindrome, the repetition of images and phrases drawing the action into sharper focus. Through its cinematic lens, the camera's eye moving in and out of tight angles, a traumatic scene is rendered in harrowing detail, the tension palpable, heightening, and powerfully felt. Whether it's a crown of sonnets about Chicago's South Side or a pantoum for Black boys, the shapes Taylor's poems make become amplifiers for exploration, declaration, and powerful emotion. In South Side, she rhymes thug and hug, mother and cover, spinning the neighborhood so that we see neighbors, sidewalks, back seats, subways, in all their difficult and luminous specificity, so that we feel the truth of her declaration, which begins the poem and ends it. This is what teaches me to love. Please welcome Taylor Byas.
Thank you so much for that introduction and for inviting me to be here. And of course, Alfred and Zara for helping to put this together. Thank you so much for having me. And to Greg, who I get to read with. I'm so excited to hear you. I'm glad you mentioned Pantoum for Black Boys in your introduction, because I'm actually going to start there. And these are poems from my debut chapbook, Blood Warm, that I'm going to begin with. So this is Pantoum for Black Boys, after the painting African Night Market by Walter Baltese. As the sky's colors separate like oil and water, Black men turn blue in the sunset. Flies hover over the tables, circle like buzzards, fruit left for dead. Black men turn blue in the sunset like cotton dipped in indigo. Police circle like buzzards, fruit left for dead, a red smudge on a white sheet. Like cotton dipped in indigo, police lights spotlight the streets. A red smudge on a white sheet marks the end of childhoods. Lights spotlight the streets, but the dark squares of sidewalk mark the end of childhoods, and the mothers have nothing but the dark squares of sidewalk to blame. We light candles, we pray, and the mothers have nothing but an empty room to fill, to lock away, to blame. We light candles, we pray for a night without bloodshed, a night that is nothing but an empty room to fill, to lock away. I want to be you for a night, without bloodshed. A night that is nothing but a trip to the gas station in a hoodie. Damn, I want to be you, as the sky's colors separate like oil and water. A lot of this book is about, racism and what it's like to be a Black woman in this country. And so this next poem is about my experience going to the Titanic Museum in Orlando, Florida, especially after loving the movie so much, but also like thinking anew about the history of the actual event. So this is the Titanic Museum in Orlando, Florida. I board 1912. A fake boarding pass renames me like a new document, brands a fresh time of death. No cameras to recall what I cannot. The necktie and socks starched by ocean, a pocket watch, a gilded macaroon balded of gold flecks, its hands pegged on salt-annulled hours. I don't look for myself in the list of dead, the names like Star Wars opening crawl graved in thin ice, the letters thin scars. But a plaque wards off my touch. An iceberg sweats in another room, and I press my palm into its face until it aches. The surface ticketed with handprints and finger holes from the guests that passed before me. But this is the easy part. On the fake deck, I forget myself. Lights pitched over the railing to parrot water without breath, waveless, and one of the door's portholes black as a moonless night. Then catch the hollow of my own mouth, the surprise of this sudden rewrite of history, the reflection of my Black face, a stranger to this ship. This next one is probably one of my favorites in this collection. I was thinking about superhero movies and thinking about as a Black woman, how many times or how often I get to see a Black woman as the sort of damsel in distress figure that gets saved. And so this is, I don't care if Mary Jane gets saved or not. I can't lie. I try to imagine myself in Spider-Man's grip. My damsel in distress scream strung through the city like Christmas lights. I really did. Then my Black ass would never be in Spider-Man's grip. My damsel in distress don't look like Kirsten Dunst or Emma Stone. I looked. I really did. But my Black ass would never be dainty enough to be rescued by a white hero. The movie villains don't look like Kirsten Dunst or Emma Stone. I looked. But the women who terrorize me in real life are dainty enough to be rescued by a white hero. The movie villains always come for the white heroine and she will cry. But the women who terrorize me in real life are strategic, hammering out an axe with tears. The playbook goes, always come for the white heroine and she will cry wolf, cry danger, call the police, the 911 call strategic, hammering out an axe with tears. The playbook goes, there is an African-American woman threatening me, cry wolf, cry danger, call the police, the 911 call a masterclass on acting. Mary Jane would kill me if it was in the script. There is an African-American woman threatening me, cry until Spider-Man dropped from the sky. The way I play dead, a masterclass on acting. Mary Jane would kill me if it was in the script, because what else could I be but the villain until Spider-Man dropped from the sky? The way I play dead in the cocoon of Spider-Man's web, you can tell I've practiced. Because what else could I be but the villain? I can't lie. I try to imagine myself. I'm gonna read one more from this chapbook and then I'm gonna move on to some other poems. I'm gonna read the final poem of this chapbook, and this is titled Geophagia. They say eating the soil might be good for you, to have your pale chiclet teeth redlined by clay, your ocean clear mouthwash bloodied when you spit in the sink. Mistake this for a split lip, a back alley beating that has left the tongue fat enough to rick your cries for help. Your grandmother tells you to avoid the clay cooling in the shade of the taller trees, and you don't. After rain, the clay goes garnet, clumps of wine dark up to your elbows, smeared around your lips. My God, you've gone cannibal. They say eating the soil might be good for you with all of its minerals. The blood that wept from swollen black toes and dried in the shape of another country. In death, someone fed this tree. After a few mouthfuls tonight, you feel a little madness creeping in. You watch the sunset while sitting back on your heels, its half step into darkness, packing the world into red clay. This is blood warm, the heat of night closing in like a mob. Bribe the sun to set on you instead, let it light you aflame. Okay, I'm going to switch and I'm going to read some poems from my actual second chapbook titled Shutter. It just came out last month. It's pretty new. In this project, I find myself thinking a lot about the male gaze and what it's like to sort of construct an authentic self when sort of every lens that you see yourself through is through that lens. And so it's thinking a lot about art and a little bit about theory. So I'm going to start with the opening poem, and the epigraph is from the Purdue website. It's a psychoanalysis definition for the mirror stage, and it reads, "For Lacan, this act marks the primordial recognition of oneself as I, although at a point before entrance into language in the symbolic order. This stage's misrecognition subsequently characterizes the ego in all its structures." So this poem is titled Mirror Stage. In the mirror, I trouble my existence with another self. I have just learned of whole things, and too soon do I learn of splitting. I cycle through fear and joy and back again with the knowledge that I will do what I want myself to do. I put a hand to the glass, and I am cool where I know there's heat. I kiss myself and find me unwelcoming. I blow onto the glass, and my second self does not receive my breath on my tongue. Decades later, I eye the eye I've been straining to touch for years. I play games with me. I lean in, and the self leans in. I step back, and I step back. I press a finger to the glass, and we point at ourselves. I split again, from 2 to 4 to 8 to more, another eye, another eye, another eye for me to answer to. I am a lover of form, and so when I encountered the duplex form, which is created by Jericho Brown, I was excited, so excited, and of course I had to try it. And so this is a duplex that I wrote, and this is titled Photography. Somewhere, my body develops apart from me, in a dark room on a square of a Polaroid. In a dark room on a square of a Polaroid, someone's pinched fingers pull me from the realm of ghost. Someone's pinched fingers pull me from the realm of ghost. A photographer snaps to grab my attention. A photographer snaps to grab my attention to the doe-eyed camera lens. Look at me, honey. To the doe-eyed camera lens, look at me, honey, in the flash. I'm only real if you capture me. In the flash, I'm only real if you capture me looking into the lens. You double behind it. Looking into the lens, you double behind it. Somewhere, my body develops apart from me. I am very online. I'm on Twitter a lot. And a little while ago, there was an incident on Twitter where there was a very cartoonish drawing of a tampon. And a man got really sort of upset about it. And in response to this drawing of the tampon, he wrote, asymmetrical images / curvature in drawing, especially in the context of a bodily function which occurs below the belt, tends to conjure thoughts of mischief, which I thought was a very interesting response. And so I wrote a poem about it. And so this poem is the title of his response. Like a child, you call it what it could be before it fully forms. I draw you a half moon, you claim a thigh that quivers in nosy moonlight. I sketch the curve of a suture needle and your mind will supple it, mollify the metal into a breast, drooping into a waiting hand. Anything cylindrical is off the table. This practice of misnaming was once a rite of passage, a multiple choice test bootlegged on middle school bathroom stalls and nail polish and Sharpies. The most sacred parts of ourselves abstracted in our childish renderings. How much mischief could a drawing conjure then, when the first time seeing myself was not in glass, but in too sharp angles and miscalculations, inches and inches of space between what a boy could reach with the flick of his tongue. In one sketch, the vagina yawned open like a greedy newborn. In another, it bled like a bullet wound. At home, I laid in bed, pried myself open in front of a mirror to find the monster I thought I was. I tried to draw it from memory, its curves and folds shaded in where my skin was darker than the rest of my body. It looked more like a rose, mid-wilt, just beginning to stink with its thirst. In its fullest form, I couldn't call it sexy. It did not make me desire myself. Like a flower in its last days, it only said, look at me now. I will not always be this pretty. This next poem is titled First Wednesdays. I was thinking about, as one tends to do in a pandemic, I was thinking about the apocalypse. And so this was, I also was looking at those very weird images of nuclear testing sites. And those dolls that they place in the settings, I think it's so interesting. And I was kind of thinking about that alongside this idea of the end of the world and the apocalypse. So this is First Wednesdays. My God, how a sound empties the world. A cup of tea siphoned through the arm of a hot kettle, losing steam at the tornado siren's first whine. Can anything go on when the sky howls like something wounded and signaling for protectors? And so everything falls silent, like a mother waiting to hear her child's next breath. In your stillness, your mug halfway to your mouth, your body shaded in the afternoon's beiges like an oil portrait, you welcome the end. Imagine yourself a doll staged in a nuclear testing site before the blast, and here's the scene. An apron rests on your plastic hips, a skillet on the stovetop never heats or cracks the grease, your metal tongue suspend in air to pinch the bacon that never dropped. No smacking here, no croak, no laugh to seep through your off-white chiclet teeth on the counter, sticks of butter dusted with salt refuse to melt. The alarm umbrellas into a rolling cloud, kicking up desert calm, and you're straining those dummy cheeks to keep a smile, and death is a slow approaching cloud that will reverse the hem of your skirt like Marilyn's, and your legs and pubic bones forget their modesty. There in the kitchen, you brace yourself, titanium stiff, and every hinge of you will be unhinged by force. And even when you're ripped apart, a piece of lip and teeth, your smile remains intact in the middle of the rubble. Okay, I'm going to read just a few newer poems. This one actually just came out yesterday. And this is called After the Car Accident. I slow traffic with my worry, kneeling and checking my car for damage. My palm on its feverish hood like a mother checking a child's temperature in the heat of the sun doubling its sickness. In the black paint's warped reflection, I could be mistaken for my father. This froggish position, squatting on my toes, my forehead becoming his in its rumpled state, even our concern biological, shared, right down to the way we squint at an injured thing, the way we have only temporary fixes for what is broken. I list the damages out loud, to no one, to the metronome of my hazard lights, to convince myself I've done it. This too is hereditary, struggling with admissions of guilt. On the phone with the insurance company, I begin to unbraid a legacy of blamelessness. Yes, I was operating my vehicle alone. The car was parked and empty when I hit it. This is just another version of the tree falling in the forest question. If no one saw me hit the car, did I do it? If my father never apologized on our old phone calls, did he truly wound me? The insurance agent on the phone is asking questions, following the printed script taped next to her computer screen. Is the car drivable? Are you hurt? I don't know which question I'm answering anymore. It doesn't matter. Yes, it comes pouring out of me like smoke from a car's underbelly, the hiss of air finding the path of least resistance. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, I'm going to read the opening poem of a sort of like new poem series that I've started. And this is titled Sculpture Study Number 1, Brooklyn, New York. A woman's real first lesson about her body is nothing to write home about. The second lesson, one of colonization. It happens in a big city, the sidewalks gone half dust, and the woman believing for once there is something for her to claim. This complex ecosystem of space, improvised measurements to guess by, the swing of a tote bag, a soft circumference of hair. The woman is eyeing her way to the J train when a man made faceless by the crowd grabs her ass. There are two options. Be crazy or be quiet while the incident reworks the DNA. There is one option, because the silence sires some sort of madness later. Right there on the corner, she stops, marbles against the summer heat, eases her hair from its rubber band to let something free. The faceless man hurts her to still life, an inanimate thing bedazzled in all of the city's wet offerings. The day's earlier drizzle still drying, the humid air relentless with stickiness. What are we allowed to really be when we hurt in public? Human or statue? As if she thinks this into existence, the evening sun glosses her brown skin in a coat of bronze and she grows into the ground. No one can tell the difference as they shuffle around her, give extra space. Look how gentle they are when there is no harm to be done. Okay, and I have the last poem as I come up on my time. I'm going to read, it's an older poem from a while ago. If I can find it, goodness. Here it is. Okay, this is my final poem. Thank you all so much for being here and for listening. This is On Hesitation. I wish I let you drive as the sky closed the lid on things. The headlights on the other side of the highway blurred to orbs as fuzzy as dandelions, my sight failing in the dark. But I was in a groove, wasn't ready to stop again before we crossed the next state line. So when you spotted a barn, a black stamp licked and pressed against the midnight blue, I stopped you before you even began. We don't have time for adventures. But this pattern continued, you straightening at each siding of wood rot, at every front barn door cracked open like a knife wound. Soon, I tired of the cornfields, their sameness, the vanity with which they continued to spawn the self. So I indulged you, abandoned the highways smooth to spit gravel in the wake of your Jeep. When we pulled up to this barn, you dated its abandonment, at least 10, 15 years, because of the smile of the roof. The wind breezing through the barn's gut, its catcall whistle, and both sets of doors blown open. Your pulse two-stepped during our silent watching, and I thought you were turned on by this somehow, and my God, you were. Let's go in, find some hay like in the movies. And what of the pessimist in me? Betting on the rustic charm of disarray as a trap, some chainsaw-wielding killer eyeing us from the Cyclops window. Even you could go rogue. One bite of me giving way to another, then another. But you've gotten out of the car now. Come around and open my door. We'll laugh about this years from now. Your hand in the dark, not how I've always remembered it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Taylor. Wonderful reading. I knew that we were going to be hearing a powerful new voice, but what struck me was the new pair of eyes that we were given to see the world in a way we hadn't been seeing it till now. All right, so our next reader is Greg Williamson. Greg Williamson grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, and now lives in Baltimore, where he has taught at Johns Hopkins University since 1992. I won't bother to list the awards his work as a poet has brought him. Williamson's talent is not the kind that would go unnoticed by anyone. An old friend of the Powder River poets, Tim Murphy, 20 years ago called Greg Williamson the most prodigiously gifted young poet to come along since Wilbur, Hecht, and Justice appeared around 1950. Two of those poets, Anthony Hecht and Richard Wilbur, provided blurbs for Williamson's first book, The Silent Partner, published in 1995. Wilbur, never given to hyperbole, had this to say: "It seems that Williamson has every gift, technical or imaginative." Wilbur got it exactly right, as usual. Technique and imagination. Indeed, this Southern gentleman who works in traditional prosody has proven as wildly innovative as any of his contemporaries. He invented a new poetic form called double exposures for his second book, Errors in the Script, published in 2001. Taylor mentioned another, in her reading, she mentioned Jericho Brown's, were they called Duplex? Anyway, Taylor read one of a poem in that new poetic form. This is something not altogether unlike that. Double exposures. And then in 2018, he published a most marvelous piece of luck in which he unveiled another formal invention, a sequence of 68 sonnets wherein the speaker of each poem dies in its closing line. Formal invention is but one hallmark of Williamson's poetry. Others include his lightning swift, zigzagging wit and an intellectual scope worthy of a modern day Aristotle. Williamson is at home in the terminology of thermodynamics, algebraic geometry, quantum physics. He walks at his leisure through fields of language Wordsworth never visited, which brings us to his most audacious innovation yet, the whole story of Kirby the Sneak and Arlo the True, a children's story for grown-ups. Pretending that young readers are the target audience for this Oxford lecture in disguise gives Williamson permission to borrow the meter of Dr. Seuss and to avail himself of the freshness of language as spoken by children. Introducing the hound dog, who is one of the story's two heroes, he writes, Arlo the True had a super good nose that could sniff out the grade in your back to school clothes. That goes well beyond your usual synesthesia. When describing Kismet the cat's extraordinary sense of hearing, he adds two heaping helpings of alliteration to the line. She could hear a slug slide and the sneeze of a snail. If simile making were an Olympic event, Williamson would vie for the gold. The hornet nest hung like a bindle of fire or a hanger of organized airborne barbed wire. Roughly half of the 12,000 line poem narrates the impossible theft of a hole in the ground and its return. In the poem's epilogue, which is actually longer than the story itself, anything goes. We're given an ekphrasis of a painting by Velázquez, a genealogy of border collies, literary analysis of Chaucer, a history of timekeepers, a meditation on the nature of time itself, etc., etc., etc. It's hard to picture the child prodigy for whom this illustrated children's book was written, but it's easy to imagine its ideal reader. The circle of listeners virtually gathered here may be the very bullseye of Williamson's target audience, whatever he chooses to read. Greg, your stage is yours.
Thank you for inviting me to speak with all of you. And Taylor, what a terrific reading. We haven't had a chance to meet, but I hope we do. That was terrific. A friend of mine, and I think a friend of a lot of you guys, is Brad Lighthauser. His new book is called Rooms, and it's just come out. It's about poetry and craft, and it's really terrific. I don't have a copy of it yet, but I've seen it in manuscript, and he mentions a little bit of this poem from the poem that the book that Alfred mentioned. It's a bunch of sonnets, and as Alfred said, the everyman character, he doesn't exactly, I don't kill him off, but he ends up being dead in the 9th line, and everything gets better after that. And this one is called Easter Island. So the title is supposed to be an encyclopedia of sorts. I didn't finish everything, but whatever the title is has to be the last word. And so Easter Island goes like this. And I'm glad to know that the History Channel has confirmed the theory of this book from 1947. The statues, we now know, were carved in place, then transconveyed across some 13 tons, the lonely trade wind-whipped terrain by spacemen using laser beams. See Williamson's The Secret Places of the Lion. But that's science, and you contemplate out there in mid-Pacific the obsessive glut of clenched jaws and the 1,000-mile stare until your excavation's at an end. You see, with peerless eyes, the oblong sun go down and see in your own rocky highland its leaning headstones, and the endless wind, resigned, enisled, cut off from everyone, your kinship with the tribe of Easter Island. As I say, I can't see anybody, but I think that there are some students of mine who are graduating seniors this year from Johns Hopkins. And if you guys are out there, this one's for you. It's called College. Bear with me, gentlemen. As once was billed by Cardinal Newman, John H., college campus derives from the Latin collegium, a guild, fraternity, or gathering, and campus, field, a gathering in a field, football. Crisp beer buzz, ribs on the smoker Saturdays, bourbon and bombshells. Goddamn boys, it's football. Bryant, Paul Bear. Boys crying, girls a gaze. Until you suit up for your last home game and take the field. Everyone stands. Your great career is over. Take a bow, son. Acknowledge the crowd. The play-by-play man calls your name, but you need a miracle. It's fourth and fate as you rerun the plays you made in college. Somewhat along those lines, and for the same, and in the same spirit is beer. So beer is a mildly alcoholic beverage made from a malted farinaceous grain, combined with choice hops and allowed to age. Beer's proof God loves us, Franklin, and we'd fain have beer. Beers having given us so much. Beer bong, beer gut and goggles, beer-induced liaisons. Bless its beery heart. A crutch? No way, man. Beer me. You were getting juiced. Until you split to meet the great beer man himself. It's party time. They serve an ice cold draft, and you're a legend here. Immortalized in stone, an artisan, artiste. The grit, the showmanship, the verve, and your last words. Watch this, man. Hold my beer. When I was in the 7th grade, our first assignment in lab was called Distillation of Wood. And essentially, I think you put wood in a test tube and you set it on fire. And then what you get is water. I don't know if y'all went to 7th grade, but this is called water. And it goes like this. Distillation of body, class in all. It boils down to vapors, truancy, and chemicals like hard-on, more-on, straw, and varying amounts of irony. But mostly we're made of water, bottled sweat, watery eyes, watery mouths, a stream of invective, a river of lies. We're just all wet. And you've got a head like a lake, your liquid dream, until blue wavelets glinting like doubloons, you demonstrate the swan dive's brilliant bow, your backstroke's clean technique. He's a regular otter. Hobnobbing in gin-textured afternoons, making a statement in your chic maillot. Another one whose name is writ in water. Alfred mentioned this book, and it's a long book for me anyway. It's called The Whole Story of Kirby the Sneak and All of the True, and it's about my border collie Kirby and Redbone Coonhound Arlo. And Kirby is precociously smart, and Arlo is precociously defensive, and he protects everything. Just going to pick up in the middle. So Arlo dug a hole in the ground, and there's a sort of circumpunct around it, and the everything's cool until Kirby decides to steal a hole and put it in the neighbor's yard, Mr. McCornchowder, and then everything is disrupted. And Kirby decides that he must put the hole back, but at great peril to himself. So after Kirby steals the hole, things are going to pot. And I'll just try to pick up in the middle. The sun had begun to slide out of the sky. The brook that ran off to the sea had run dry. The earthy worm's dirts had turned hard as a rock, and the dragonfly's motor was starting to knock. The hummingbird noted the butterfly's gown seemed a little last season, a little run down. The alien ants had abandoned their tasks and put on small ant face-sized masquerade masks to challenge each other at mumbledy pegs, while the grasshoppers fiddled rye jigs on their legs. The bullfrog, worn out from his scuba emprise, was unwillingly resting his Fabergé eyes. And the signature spider, which just might be worse, had begun in her web under some kind of curse, a chaotic and homespun, untutored, unterse, but unvarnished, true eclogue in doggerel verse. And Kirby the Sneak, even Kirby the Crook, knew not to put something like that in the book. But what could he do with stuff all out of whack when a voice like a cat dog said, "Get the hole back." Get the hole back, huh? Now, there was a plan. If you needed a dog, well, the Sneak was your man. So Kirby the Sneak reassembled his gear: one snow axe, two snorkels, a hollow point spear, a vanishing hand cream called You Disappear, one waterproof undersea eavesdropping ear, liquid spray smokescreen, bath begone pills, two portable oil slicks, fake dollar bills, an inflatable sandstorm, a ship-to-shore phone, a genuine black market CIA bone, for stakeouts of henchmen and grifters and spies, a reversible peephole, one Groucho disguise, a hand-me-down astrolabe, stamps, odds and ends, like the BSA guidebook to Bolins and Bends, two microcell stop choppers with touchscreen control, and a hole poacher bag for the hole that he stole. When he got to the gate, he could see he forgot that the stuck-open gate had swung shut as he shot out of Mr. McCornchowder's gardening plot when he dropped off the hole in the land of the knot, regretting he didn't have videotape of his daring done, brave, and heroic escape. So Kirby, like Hannibal, paced up and down with a scroll of the plans in his fist and a frown over last weekend's roundtable meeting of menses on structural weak points and privacy fences. And this one was long, yay high, painted green, like something right out of a fence magazine. And that's when the cat said, "Remember the cat? Dig a down hole on this side and an up hole on that." Well, that's what the cat said, with a cat dog-like smirk, and Kirby the Sneak thought, by Jove, that might work. So he pulled up his pants fur and spit in his hands and strapped on a headlamp with blue rubber bands and checked the canary and took a big swig of couch cushion Kool-Aid and started to dig. He dug like he'd entered the treasure chest cup, all the way to the bottom. And then he dug up. At the top of the up hole, he got out the scope from the periscope outlet to scope out the slope of Mr. McCornchowder's No Kirby's land for a booby trap, tripwire, or a big dog tree stand. The coast, as they say in the Coast Guard, was clear. So Kirby the Sneak hauled up all his gear and slipped on his no footprint hole tracker mocks with an eye out for polar bears, cheetahs, and crocs, and sidled in silence alongside the side of the fence with the Audubon Hole Hunter's Guide, and a three-legged stool, and a prospector's pick, and a Mercator map, and a doodlebug stick. And Kirby slunk back to the shade of the shed with the lamp on his hat and the hole in his head, and the sack on his back, and the map in his pit, and the pipe in his mouth, and his hands full of spit, and Kismet, the quizzical cat on the roof, in some kind of quantum mechanical proof of teleportation. But never mind that. And never mind also, the diamond point batwing bow tie she was wearing was fine-tuned to pick out by echolocation the roar of a tick, or the crashing cascade in the wink of a bee, or the galloping hooves in the dwarf pygmy flea. But Kirby the sneak did not make a sound as he hunkered down over the hole in the ground on the three-legged stool with a come-along winch hooked up to a tree, and a canvas strap winch, a grease gun, a crowbar, a gatorback pole, and a folding screen sifter to sift out the hole. Turned out it wasn't as hard as he thought, and he didn't need all of the stuff that he brought. He greased up the downhole, strapped on the wrench, stuck in the crowbar, cinched up the winch, tied off the tripod, punched in the pole, and like Archimedes did, popped out the hole. As easy as pie. As easy as cake. As easy as pie cake makers make, and polished it off with a terry cloth rag and dropped the whole thing in the hole poacher bag. And Kirby was cool. He was cucumber cool. As he packed up the tripod, ridge, gun, bar, pole, stool, and the sack full of hole, like a Santa Claus dog, and candid his hat for the semi-long slog to the burbles' yard, thinking, yes, sir, it's true, and patted his pockets, then slicked down his due. For the medals of valor, he figured were due. You did it again, you old genius dog, you. And that's when it happened, the way it'll do. A shadow passed over, mockingbird flew, a leaf fell, a limb creaked, a galvanized pail swung in its well in an overgrown dale. And Kirby the genius dog stepped on a twig, a tiny, wee, little, small, not at all big twig, the size of a splinter shaved off of a spoke of the fairy's toy wagon Mercutio spoke of, his coachman a gnat, or the bit in the teeth of a Shetland-bred seahorse, or sword in the sheath of a samurai elf, but a twig nonetheless. And Kirby was in you got it, mess. So what happened next, huh? I bet you can guess if you've ever been in a you got it mess. The bow tie grew bigger and started to glow with a radium green from the knot in its bow, and quickened a little and quivered to hear the SETI faint frequency tickle its ear. The squirrel in the crow's nest on dog watch detail, detecting the telltale signs of a tail, sent out the alarm in teeth chattering Morse to the rest of the treetop reconnaissance force, crying sneak attack, havoc, yikes, cease and desist, and beware of the very same dog whom the gist was in this case not lost on in spite of the well-known but curious obstacle squirrels can't spell. The crow on his glide plane came out of the sun to deride him in skywriting. See Kirby run. The spigots popped up in a pillbox array with the dogged hydraulic intention to spray every inch of the feet in the yard they were in, including the inch that the curry was in, and Mr. McCornchowder stood in his clothes with one of his handmade colonial hose and heard the Morse code and the clamor of crows, and was not fooled at all by the Groucho Marx nose, but took a cold aim and struck a hard pose and grinned with his mouth part and turned on the hose. Thank y'all very much.
I just can't get enough of that poem. You know, if you were to use a yellow highlighter and get the good lines, the whole book would shine like the sun. You know, it's just wonderful. And you
Oh, thank
know, it's better it's better after, you know, the second and third time through. But the best of all is to hear you read it with that voice. You know, the great voice. Well, I like it though when you do stop for a minute. It's very funny. Anyway, hey, we actually have 6 minutes left here. If does anyone have a question that they would like to ask either Taylor or Greg? You can put it right. Yeah, you can put it in the little Q&A spot down there. It's not often that we end up with a couple of minutes at the end of these things. So, you know, if I heard you talk somewhere else about how you had tried this story as a prose piece, and you were always coming up short. I mean, it was just wasn't working. And then your wife said something to you about why don't you try making a poem of it? And then you stumbled on, that must have been when you stumbled on the anapestic tetrameter, you know.
Well, here's what happened. If you, so it wasn't this story. I was trying to write this short story for like 4 or 5 times, and it was a few years, well, quite a few years. And Emily said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "My story is broken."
I love that line.
And I tried it a bunch of times. I don't think I'm ever going to go back to it. I had high hopes, but it defeated me altogether. And she said, "Well, have you ever tried something? Maybe that's too hard. Have you ever tried like a children's poem?" And I said, "Well, I mean, what are you implying, my dear lady?" And so I said, "Okay," and I put on my mad face, right? Like, I'll show her. And I wrote down a few lines about my dogs, and I said, and it was, you know, Dr. Seuss meter. And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, you all right? You want a children's poem? Okay, you got it." And I thought it was going to be just like a day, maybe a weekend. And then it ended up taking me 2 years or more, because I couldn't figure out ever how to end it. The story just kept going. And so I'm not sure who was victorious in this competition, because I never did finish the story, and I'm never going to go back to it. And but it really was just that challenge. I mean, maybe that's too hard. Maybe try a children's poem.
You lost, but you won. You lost, but you got the prize. I have a question here, and for both of you. Can the poets talk a bit about present poetry projects? Of course, Taylor, you did read from that wonderful new chapbook. Do you have anything else in the works?
Yeah, so I have this chapbook that just came out. My debut full length is coming out in the spring of next year, and then I'm currently working on another full length collection, which is in some ways kind of like a blowing up of this second chapbook, Shutter. So it's this sort of larger project that is thinking about the male gaze, as I talked about, and sort of considering it through the lens of art and film and theory. So that's what I'm working on now, poetry collection wise, and that's largely prose, which is also very different for me because I'm very much like have been working in form. So that's really exciting. And I'm also starting a YA novel in verse. We'll see how that goes.
Oh my goodness, that's a great plan.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And you, Greg? Do you have something coming? Have you have anything in the works right now?
Well, yes, but I don't know when it's going to be finished.
Yeah, you didn't know when the hole in the ground was going to be finished. That's for sure.
No, I did, and yeah, and like the last 2 times, I like with the most marvelous piece of luck. I was going to make it a lot bigger until Philip Hoy, the publisher, called me up and said, "We got a spot. Whatever you got, turn it in."
Oh my
I'm
goodness.
like, I'm not even close to. I was gonna like explain the entire world, and he goes, "No, you're done now."
Well, you could have part 2.
It's true. There's a lot left unexplored.
Well, thank you, both of you. This is a wonderful reading. It was really a joy to meet you, albeit on screen, and to hear both of you read. You were great. Take care.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Mark.
Thank you. Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you, Greg.